Howdy, howdy, everyone. Welcome to the I Read It for the Plot podcast. We've only got a few more chapters before we close our first book, but we still have plenty of stories to tell. If you could like, comment on, share this podcast, hit that little bell to get notifications for new episodes, share promo videos for new chapters. It would really help us reach more fellow readers and continue to build our bookworm community. If you would like to join the I Read It for the Plot Discord, where we have weekly challenges, trope talks, book recommendations, event sharings, and more. Openings are shared on my Instagram stories on the days of chapter premieres. This week's Discord challenge is a writing challenge. Write a conflict resolution scene between two or more characters. Third character can be used as a mediator or comic relief. Use expressive dialogue and have fun with your characters. Post your scene on the weekly challenge channel on the Discord. You can read it aloud or reenact it on your own social media with hashtag I Read It for the Plot weekly challenge. And if you have any book or author recommendations, or if you are an aspiring writer or published author, a fantasy book event organizer, or a cosplayer, and you're interested in coming onto the podcast as a guest, please feel free to reach out via email at ireaditforthepodcast@gmail.com, or shoot me a DM at Instagram or TikTok. Username Caladrius25. We would love to hear your story. That being said, grab a cup, grab a blanket, and let's talk books. Chapter 17, Making Waves with Robin Alvarez. Today's chapter is going to introduce us to published author of When Oceans Rise. She is a member of the Writers of TikTok community, which is how I found her content. Fellow readers, may I introduce Robin Alvarez. How we doing?
I'm so great. I loved that intro.
All right, so shall we start off with, tell us about your writing history. Tell us about yourself, Robin.
I have been writing for a really long time. Mm-hmm. I was trying to get published for a really long time. Like I started writing 6 months before I was supposed to graduate with a degree in animation. And I was like, oh, I'm getting the wrong degree. This is what I actually want to do. And I think that was part of the problem of going so fast in my undergrad was I didn't really give myself time to explore like other interests and like take this seriously. So I just kept writing. And my first book took like 5 years. It took a really long time. I was just a perfectionist and I wanted to get it right. And I was so determined that it would sell. And, by the time it went through rounds and rounds and rounds of agents, I was like, I should probably write a different book. I should probably try again. And I wrote that second book in like 20 days and I got an agent with it. And it was insane that it went so fast. But then my agent spent like, I don't know, 3 years, like 2 contracts, because it was back in the day where like I ended up signing a contract and then after it expires, you sign another one. And so I was into like a second contract with that person. And ultimately we ended up parting ways because she kind of wouldn't put my book out there. Like she submitted it to like 5 people only and then was like, I don't want to put it out there again without heavy edits. I'm like, we've been editing for years. What are you talking about? Heavy edits. Yeah. It's seen 5 people, not even 5 places, like just 5 people. And so we parted ways. I still think she's a nice person, but it just didn't work. And then I kind of gave up on getting an agent for a while there because I was so sad and kind of my trust was broken. I wrote more books that I didn't really like put out there into the publishing community. Like I didn't try to query seriously the way I had previously. And then I finally went the small pub route, which is how When Oceans Rise first debuted, was with the small pub. So I didn't need an agent. Until one day, one of my writing mentors from Writer's House was like, you need an agent. You've gone about as far as you can on your own. You need an agent. And I was like, do I? I cried. And I scared him. I cried because like I didn't usually do that. I'm very like smiley and like, I just told him it like dims my light and I don't want to do that. I had just gotten this like job with Owl Crate doing an editor position for Monsters in Masquerade, and it didn't occur to me to like offer that as a deal. But I messaged some agents after his advice going, hey, I have this deal. And I gotten 2 solid responses. And so I like actually had choices, and I have a new agent now who is so wonderful. She is so good at being an agent and like sticking up for me. And we've done a couple contracts together already. And we're working on submission for like my next novel so that it can go out into bigger spaces, which is really cool.
Yay!
So I kind of get to like sit between the indie and the trad pub, space, which is actually something that I really enjoy. Like I was very scared of initially, but I actually really enjoy it because like the timelines are different for those books. So, I can produce indies faster and then still like, be in some bigger spaces, which is great.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that being said, tell us about your book. About When Oceans Rise.
When Oceans Rise. So I wrote this book after I'd taken a memoir creative writing class where they were like, write about a time you almost died. And I wrote about a time when I almost died while surfing.
Oh.
Right. And my professor was like, well, okay, but why did you go out there? I was like, I was 17. Like, that's what 17-year-olds do. They do reckless, stupid things because they think they're going to live forever. And she was like, but seriously, like, why were you out there? And I was like, well, I was kind of in an abusive relationship. Not even kind of, I really was. And I felt very disconnected from my family. I didn't know if anyone would even miss me if I was gone. And that was kind of something I was battling in those waves, was like, what is really the point when I'm going through all this and no one really knows that I'm going through all of it? And she was like, that's what you need to be writing about. And after that class, I spent the rest of the year, just doing my schoolwork, but the story stuck with me. And so over the summer, I wrote the novel version of that with like a fantasy twist where this girl gives her voice up to a sea witch to escape that abusive relationship. And the sea witch uses that voice to unleash monsters on alternate timeline Corpus Christi, Texas, and she's got to get her voice back to save both worlds.
I'm already hearing the Little Mermaid reference in that one.
Yeah.
I love it. I love that though.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It was very personal. It was the story I didn't want to ever write. It was like my 6th novel, and I didn't want to write that novel. It was a lot to relive, and there were a lot of ways that I was, I guess, still blaming myself for the things that happened that were not really my fault when I looked back, but I just didn't want to look back. And then that happened to be the story that sold. And I think it's because I was really saying a lot of honest things that weren't, smiley and flowery. And that's, hard to do sometimes, but it did expose me to the kind of writing I want to do, something that's a little more honest and real and maybe a little scary to do, but it helps people. Hopefully helps people. So yeah, it was good for me.
Especially, I especially can see that resonating with a lot of readers who are especially going through that themselves, and they can relate to that. And this is like a safe place for them to. Reading is a safe place for you to sit with your feelings and just kind of find a way to. Writing, especially, is a great way to release. It is a sanctuary of sorts and the best form of self-expression.
That's very beautiful. I really liked that.
I back when I was going through when I was in high school, writing was my best form of self-expression, especially when I was having so much trouble. I was in not a great friendship, and it took me until like my adult years to realize just how toxic that friendship was. And I remember writing about them in my stories, and then I realized, looking back, every single time I wrote my main character and the character that that was based on him, they were always fighting. Yeah. There was always like this main conflict, and I look back on that, I was like, maybe my inner writer was trying to tell me something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think sometimes we have to work those things out because there's love there, but it's not always healthy, right?
Yeah.
And you can have those kind of toxic relationships with partners, but you can have them with friends and bosses and, places where people have just more power in that dynamic, and it doesn't it's almost harder to get out of those situations, right? So yeah, it can be hard, and writing can help us figure out like what was going on, what wasn't feeling right, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And this was one of those relationships where I was finally strong enough to let go, and I looked back, I felt so much relief. Like it was this
Yes.
full, like really life in color that I kind of describe at one point in the book, because that was that high that I was living on because I was so suppressed for so long. I didn't remember what that could feel like to not have that kind of pressure built on me.
Yeah, I get that. And most people don't even realize they get so, because negative emotions, negative feelings can be very addicting. And if it's all you know for the longest time, having a break from that or any change from that is completely scary because it's something that you haven't felt before. But a lot of people don't realize just yet. As soon as you get away from that toxic relationship, that toxic environment, there is an immense amount of relief.
Yeah.
That stress is, I mean, there's still residue stress. There's still like the trauma responses and the memories, but in that moment, you don't have to live with it on a consistent basis.
Yeah. And remembering what life was like without it is almost strange, because a lot of times we just adapt to this new normal that isn't healthy.
Mm-hmm.
And it can be hard to remember what life is supposed to feel like, or what it can feel like. So yeah, it is something. And so I think sometimes people look at this book and they expect, like, I think the whole journey of DV beforehand, but
Mm-hmm.
it's really here's how we got here, and then what is life like after, and then like it's not all like rainbows and sunshine, and there's still a lot of healing. And I think that's really where the heart of the book is like how do we heal, how do we move forward, and is it all perfect? And no, it isn't. And sometimes we're still going to make mistakes and not feel like a good person after.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really difficult. And so that's like, I think where the heart of the story is. There's TV, but then what we do after with that and how we heal, that's like, I think where a lot of the exploration was.
Yeah, I love that.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right, going a little further into your story, you are from the Philippines originally, yes?
No.
No? Are you have
I'm,
heritage?
I'm Filipino American, so I was born in
Okay.
Florida. I'm biracial, so a lot of my characters are mixed race in some way, and
Mm-hmm.
generally specifically biracial because I am. Although I'd love to write someone triracial at some point because my kids are that. So my mom is from the Philippines, and when I was writing this book, I would call my aunt a lot and I'd be like, Auntie, help me. Like, what is correct here? Like, what am I trying to say here that isn't feeling like authentic? And she would help me, and then she would call my grandma if she couldn't answer. And so there's a lot of me reaching back into my family to ask them for support to help me be more authentic. But I will say that the story is really written from a Filipino American perspective. So it's not set in the Philippines.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm not trying to like write a story where I don't really understand what life is like there, because
Mm-hmm.
I've been here. So I'm really writing about what life is like here in that perspective. And so I think it feels a lot very much like Filipino Americans existing in Texas, really, because the book is set in Texas. And, that experience might even feel different for Filipino Americans who are in like California or who are in Minnesota. Like they're in different places, and what is life like there? It's going to be influenced by the region they're in, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's different. But yeah, I'm from Florida. I've lived in Texas a really long time. I actually really do love Texas, except for the occasional politics. But I like the spaces, because I think there are a lot of things that happen in the media that aren't really representative of everyday life. So yeah, but my family's here, so I'm here.
So, story wise, though, how does this multicultural environment um, not affect, but how is that incorporated to your main character's lifestyle? Like, and how does it contribute to her personality as well?
I think that that my book was really exploring that feeling of it was exploring diaspora, that feeling of not really belonging to either culture. So because she is mixed race and because she is Filipino and American, this distance where she didn't really feel connected to either one of her cultures. And so it was better to just like not be involved in any. But then when these Filipino monsters are being released into the world, there's this extreme immersion into what is my culture and how should I be embracing it, and who are these gods kind of controlling this space, and how did this all happen? Because there was, you know, someone kind of sacrificing her in a way to in terms of like, you know, the way villains try to better the world, and it's not, you know, that's not always better, right?
Yeah.
And so there is really her embracing that side of her Filipino culture that she really wasn't connected to before, and she comes out knowing a lot more about herself and understanding her mom a lot better, because her mom's actions are really influenced by her culture, and she spends so much of the beginning of the book not understanding why her mom is doing the things she's doing and causing all this friction between her and this terrible boyfriend that the mom immediately doesn't trust, but she doesn't know how to say that to her daughter. Like they just don't communicate in the same way. And it's not necessarily a language barrier, but a cultural barrier that she just doesn't get. And so then as she's going through this like alternate life, it makes more sense to her because she becomes more open to learning about her culture. And I think that was something that was important to show that people are allowed to connect. That's one, like just because you're a Filipino here doesn't mean you can't connect with your culture. And then to just kind of understand, because it really is beautiful, and there are a lot of nuances here that we might not get when we aren't actively trying to understand that our parents grew up in a different country, that they spoke a different language, that their religious views and their home life were just so different.
So tell us about some of your other stories as well. Like this is your published work. What about some of your unpublished? Like what kind of stories did you start writing when you first started writing? Like yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So this was my first Filipino story.
Okay.
Not really, actually. Well, it kind of was. Okay. So here it is. This is the first like where I intentionally decided that this character is Filipino and I'm going to navigate that world. Right.
Okay.
But before that, I started in writing so long ago that it was kind of when diverse books didn't really sell, and it's not a ton better right now. It's really not a ton better where diverse books
get better.
Right. But it is some better than it was back then. So I really wasn't writing like brown characters. I was writing white characters, and I am half white. And so that made sense. Right. And so my first book was like a wizard mafia, like from the perspective of a character who will be the villain. Right. And it was great. And like, you know, really young adult, like, because my voice was young adult. So it really feels that way. But it was very almost like underdeveloped in my writing skills. So if I were to redo it, I would really have to like consider like, how do I write now? And like fix some of those things that like, maybe if I were just writing the story all over again, wouldn't come up. So I think a true rewrite would probably be better, a blind rewrite.
Okay.
But that, and then that second book is a book that I really am reconsidering putting out again. So it was a banshee story. So it came from like my Irish white heritage, that side, right? And like, even though that side of my dad, they're like German and English and Irish, whatever, like they're a pretty solid mix of things. Irish comes up actually more in my DNA than any of the other stuff because it came from my grandparents, right? So that side can fluctuate where your parents' side don't really fluctuate. And my grandma was always really connected to, she's so proud of being Irish, and she would talk about that. And so I think I just naturally clung and connected with that side. And so I wrote a banshee story, and I ended up like rewriting this banshee story where this character is mixed race like me, and like divided between, again, that Irish side, the banshee side, and then her Filipino side, and what mythologies might like cross over, because she's got two parts of her that are really significant, but it leans more toward banshee because her mom is banshee, right? So there's that. And I went back and forth with, do I give this to my agent? Do I just like indie publish it? And I'm going through with an editor to really look at the bones of it all right now, because it is like a story. It's my second story I ever wrote. So, you know, it's got its own little issues. When I was like really learning this craft, I think we're always still learning.
Oh, yeah.
So there's work for that I might be like trying to do. And I don't know, I want to say if I do publish it, it'll be early next year. And I don't know. I think I would really like to publish it though, because like if my agent were to sell that other story that I've written, which is like a YA horror, I don't think it would come out until like 2027. And so I don't want to go from like 2023 when this book came out to 2027 without a book. And so I think it would just be smart to have like that indie space where like, I love this story. It may not be traditional and would probably fit really well in the indie community. Like, I think they would really love it. And it's a series, so I could be pumping out like a book a year until that next book comes out. Like,
love that.
I think that's a pretty solid plan.
When you write, or when you plot out your first book, after you finish that story, before you even really start writing it, do you do like a whole, because I do this all the time, I plot an entire series instead of just one book at a time.
I don't. I have written every book differently because I'm very solidly ADD. And so like my brain is just like, I can't do this again. And I'm like, you just got to do it differently this time so that you still want to do the thing. So every single time I've written a book, it's been different. So my whole first book was plotted out and it took 5 years. My whole second book was pantsed and it took 20 days. And so since then I try to do some weird hybrid something, and I just change something about the process. So like I have that whole Banshee story written, and then I have a very rough first draft of the second novel written, and I have no clue what's happening in that third one. Not a clue if someone were to ask me right now, but it's not published. So I have like the freedom to like kind of explore and mess it up and then go back and fix it, right? Because nobody's read that second one, so nobody's read a third one that doesn't exist. So space.
Yeah. Especially back in high school, I used to write series in my head, or I used to jot them down. I think the only one that I had not fully completed, but it was my own version of The Apocalypse when I first tried to do NaNoWriMo, National Novel Writing Month, which is coming up, people. If you're going to do National Novel Writing Month, start plotting out your story now, because it's going to get here sooner than you think.
It's going to bite you in the butt.
Yeah. And I had 3 sections of like the main character's story, the beginning of the apocalypse, the aftermath, and then the final battle was the third book, the final battle between heaven and hell, that kind of thing.
Ooh, that sounds good.
Yeah. First one was like the destruction. Okay, here's the thing with NaNoWriMo. I was a minute away from midnight and I still had 100 words left. So close. I was so close.
You didn't. That's so close. Oh my God.
And I was just finishing up the final chase scene. The final one. I was ending on a cliffhanger, which I hate with other authors, but yes, that's hypocritical of me. I did it. I was ending on a cliffhanger. I was a minute away from midnight, only had 100 words left, and I was like, I can't do this. I don't have enough time. So
enough. Okay.
Yeah. I was like in the middle of a actual race, a writing race, and I was writing a chase.
Oh my gosh. I would have been like, nope, it's time for bed. Like, whatever. I just try tomorrow.
Yeah. Or try next year.
Man. Try next year.
Yeah. But I had that whole series plotted out in my head. The first one was like the apocalypse, so the destruction of the world. Second one was the aftermath and going down to hell to meet with the devil himself. Yeah. And then the third one was this whole like preparing and then eventual battle between heaven and hell, and then the rebirth of Earth afterwards.
Oh, wow. I would have loved to read that. Like, maybe you should be still writing that.
I should rewrite it because I was very young and naive. Back then. Very, very young writing. Eloquent. I have a very eloquent writing style, but at the same time, it's looking back on it, it's like, this was good, but I can do so much better now.
Yeah. And that's what I think about my first novel too, is I'm like, there are parts I love. There are parts I really love about it. And parts I wrote well, but that there are definitely things that are new writer things that wouldn't be in there if I wrote that book today. So
one of the things I've always struggled with, and this is going to participate more to the subject of, or the niche of or not even the niche, the whole genre of this podcast. The thing I struggle most with is writing romance.
Yeah.
I haven't
so much. I love to read it.
Yeah.
In fantasy.
Yeah, I do. But the thing is, I've never been in love. So it's hard for me to really, I know.
I love that. I love that. That is so cute. Because when it happens, I'm going to be watching.
Well, when it happens, I'm probably going to struggle to believe that it's real, because anyone that I've thought, I have a different definition of being in love, of the definition of in love in general, is when it's completely 100% mutual. Yeah. And I've never had someone that I had feelings for return those feelings for me.
Yeah.
So,
I totally get that. Yes, because if it's not like reciprocated, then are we in love?
It's not love, it's infatuation.
Yeah, I get that.
A lot of people confuse it. A lot of people confuse infatuation and affection or puppy love for genuine romantic love. But the thing is, it's not a true romantic relationship unless it's a mutual connection.
Yes.
You know?
I can see that. Also, how dare those people not love you? Like, how...
No, they weren't meant. They weren't actually meant for me, and they met the people that they were meant for, and I'm really happy for them. Yeah, they found.
Really yeah.
So,
okay. Right.
Yeah, I was meant to be their friend. I was meant to to guide them on the path that was pointing them in the right direction to be that other person.
Oh, that's very cute.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I can see why that would be hard to write about then.
Yeah, because I've only had one relationship, and it was decent chemistry, no communication. Like once we realized we had so much in common, we had nothing to talk about, and neither one of us knew how to break up with each other because it was a first relationship for both of us.
Yeah. Oh my
so
God.
Again, I've never been in love, so I don't know how to write from experience. And I know that's not always necessary. I mean, it's fantasy. You know, people fantasize about love. They fantasize about sex and whatnot. But again, like if I want to bring that kind of authenticity to any characters, then I feel like I don't think I can write about this until I experience it myself. You know?
Oh, yeah. I mean, that makes sense. I bet people do it, and there must be a way, but it would be hard to explain, right?
Yeah.
Like, or to just trust that you're writing something that does feel real to someone else.
And not just over fantasized like a lot of other writers.
Well, and you can have people read it and just like read it for that kind of authenticity and be like, oh, this hits. And maybe this needs just a little bit of something else, or it doesn't hit for whatever reason. I think beta readers are so valuable that way. Like, they really will tell me. They will tell me if something is weird or awkward. And I'm like, I guess that was weird and awkward. I am weird and awkward, so I didn't see it.
Be proud of that. It is so much fun being weird and awkward.
Right? It is. Although the other day I saw, to get off subject, I saw a content creator talk about how if you're not ever cringy, you will never blow up on TikTok. And I was like, that's great. I would love to be cringy intentionally. I just don't know. I don't know how to do it intentionally, because if I'm doing it, it's accidental, and that's so great. But how will I know that I did the thing that I'm trying to intentionally do? Like, I don't know. So I can't recreate it on purpose if I am doing it. Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
So yeah, maybe I just would never super, super consistently blow up. I don't know.
You never know. Yeah. But speaking of which, though, speaking of cringy content, and you're speaking to the queen of cringe. I was like looking around. Where's my crown? I don't have a crown. Where's my headphones?
There's mine.
I am the queen of cringe.
Your content. I find it very entertaining.
Well, that's the point. I want to entertain as much people as possible, and I love being cringy. I love the fun and the dopamine it brings, and if it brings some dopamine to other people, If it makes them laugh or smile, especially if they're having a day, mission accomplished, achievement unlocked.
Perfect.
Yeah. But getting back to like content creation, let's talk about like navigating through book talk and promoting your book content and whatnot. So what's your personal experience with that?
Well, when I first came on, I was mostly on Writer Talk, which is, how we know each other. And I just kind of talked about the journey because I didn't have a deal then. When I first came on, I was querying, but I never talked about the query process because it makes me so sad that, like I lightly was doing it. And, when I receive rejections, I don't want to necessarily cry. I have one on the internet because I was so sad, but it really is very dimming to me. I don't like to do it. So I came on and I mostly talked like tips that worked for me because I realized very quickly that it may not work for everyone and people get so mad about that. And I'm like, I wasn't trying to say that. I wasn't trying to say it's the only right way, but I could see why people would think that, learning just how to speak to people with that kind of openness that says you don't have to do it this way. That was something. And then once I started having like deals to talk about, the content kind of shifted to, okay, this is like the journey I'm on right now. I just had this happen and I'm learning about it. And so I kind of just kept it open to like, here's my experiences and what did or didn't work for me, and less like writing advice, because I needed to start being on book talk side, specifically on the reader side of things. And I couldn't just do book content like here's the story I'm reading right now, because I read slow. I just do. Like I'm not the fast reader who reads like a ton, but I also have like I have reading droughts where I need a few months off and I won't be reading during that time. So there wasn't going to be day-to-day content for me. And to do that while I was trying to market a book, while I'm trying to edit that book because we're going through different stages, that was very difficult. I hit my debut year and I was in 3 debut groups, but I'm also trying to collaborate with these other authors. And then I'm trying to be in interviews and market this book in those spaces and do book tours, like the virtual ones for my ARC readers, and trying to have a street team. And that's like so overwhelming that I couldn't always be reading. How do I reach those people? I have to like talk about my content, but I have the one book to talk about and I'm going to bore people. It's a lot. It's a lot of stress to be marketing. And I'm not the best person out there who's doing it, but I'm not like, I don't want to like poo-poo on my followers. They're wonderful. And I've got like a great following, right? Like, so, I'm not like the ideal person to look at, but I'm doing all right. Right. Like, it resonates with some people. And I think that I only got burnt out when some of the silliness started to die down because I was so stressed out. And you can kind of see that when someone's stressed out and it doesn't really come through in their content very naturally. And when I'm feeling good and I'm being a little silly, like my mental health is in a better place. But it was also hard to maybe not always want to show some of those more vulnerable sides because I don't know how people are going to react. That's not why they followed me in the first place. Like I tend to have very more upbeat content. And so when I have not as upbeat content, I don't always know how people are going to respond to that. And so that part of being on social media is a little scarier. And then as the book came out, I kind of got a little bit lost about what I was supposed to be talking about on Book Talk anymore, because I needed to go back to like, who I was before. I'm still a reader, I'm still writing projects, but I can't always talk about them. Right. And so what do we make content about? And so there was a shift again once the book came out and things kind of settled down where I had to like kind of rediscover what my content was going to be like. And so that was a little, rocky trying to figure it out. And I think I'm in a better content place now where I get to be a little more lighthearted and it's become fun again. But there was definitely in my debut year, like 3 solid burnouts where I was like, I need to leave. I need to leave right now. It was hard.
Sometimes you burn out and you just need a break to cool down.
Right?
Yeah.
Right? Just take a step back. I mean, the algorithm doesn't love that, but I was not loving the algorithm, so...
Yeah. Tell me about it. But I love that. And I do love your content. I love your lightheartedness. I love your authenticity.
Thank you.
Or should I say your authenticity?
My
Eh?
author. I love it.
Fun
I love
cobbling.
your content too. It's so fun.
Thanks.
It is like the, you know, the nice and light stuff that I want to watch because I need that when I'm on TikTok. Like that's why I joined in the first place, was to like watch that kind of content and just, I don't know, relax.
Well, I'm glad it entertained you. Speaking of content entertainment, I saw one of your videos recently, something about author nemesis. I am genuinely excited to talk about this.
Well, I gotta tell you, I stole this from Angela Montoya. I love her. I don't know if you follow her on Book Talk, but she's another author who debuted in the same year as me, and she's so funny. She's so funny, and I just love her. I was like, this person will be my friend. And I like pursued her friendship. I even like brought her onto that anthology I did. I was like, I love you. Come hang out. And she had made a post once about author nemesis, and I was like, one day I will talk about my author nemesis, because it's not serious. It's Aiden Thomas, and I adore them. And the reason though that I had called them my author nemesis is because we were on this platform that was like Wattpad, back in the day, called Swoon Reads, which is now just like an imprint, right? It's an imprint. And it was one of those places where you posted your book and you're trying to get a lot of people to like and comment and engage with the book. And if you got that kind of notice, it would go to like acquisitions and they might decide to publish your book. And so we were on there roughly at the same time. Like I think I was like maybe one season behind them. And their book is so good. I mean, obviously they're New York Times bestseller. Like they're amazing. So it was just like, oh, here we are, like professional jealousy. Like here, they totally deserved it. Like there's no actual like hate or jealousy or whatever. If they didn't get that publishing, I would have these books that I love, I wouldn't have them to read and enjoy and love them. It was just like a funny like concept that someone might have, like an author nemesis, like that. I was like, oh, I've got to make this silly video because, you know, and I have, he like, when my book was out, he saw the cover, thought that was like a cool cover and like made a comment on Twitter about it. It blew my mind. I was like, there's no way that the Aiden Thomas was saying stuff about my book, right? Like, no way. So it was so nice. And then I got to actually meet them at Y'all West, and I was so nervous. My hands were shaking that I asked them to take our picture instead of me do it because my hands were shaking. Oh my goodness. I just think they're so talented and such a like a great author in person.
I love that.
Yeah.
Speaking of your cover art, I love the artwork that you did, like with the octopus along the face. You even created a little graphic for that on TikTok.
I did. I made a whole filter where people can wear my cover, and it literally is the images from my cover because I designed that cover. So I was able to pull the exact like shells that are on it for that filter. So when people wear that filter, they literally are wearing the actual pieces and not just similar pieces. But yeah, it's actually a photo like that. And that's why like I credit the photo on the back of like the original, you know, but I colored over it in Photoshop because I happen to be good at photoshopping. And then added the cracks and what are these called? Shells and stuff, and weaved in the hair. But people do tend to think it's me because technically that is my hair. Into my eyes, because the original like picture, if you see the original picture, her eyes are closed, and I was like, oh, I've got to open these eyes, let me take a picture, because I'm better at photoshopping than I am at like digitally drawing, and I just put them on there and then got to work blending.
Love it. That animation degree came in handy.
It really did. It really, really did. I was like, there's got to be something where this was worth the money that was spent, because, I really ignored that degree.
I took Adobe Illustrator back in college, and I had a really great teacher. I think the best work I did was I think I've talked about this before. It's a fan-made poster of Walk to Mordor. And
What?
basically, I don't know if you've ever actually heard of this online miniseries. It's called A Simple Walk to Mordor. I actually met one of the guys that did it, and they go to New Zealand and they walk from the Shire to Mount Doom. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And I loved it so much. For my final assignment, I made it was like a walking marathon with the exact mileage. And I got I got Mount Doom, I got Sauron's Eye, like filtered in the background, really great shading and coloring. I made two versions. I made a colored version, and I made a black and white version. And I met one of the guys at a convention in Texas, and I brought with me the black and white version. However, my water bottle broke open in my backpack, and the top corner of the paper got a little damaged. Yeah.
No. Oh,
yeah.
I would have been so upset.
I was a little embarrassed, especially when I presented them with a slightly wrinkled paper. I was like, I made this. He was so sweet. He immediately signed it. Yeah.
That is very sweet. I
Yeah.
love that.
Yeah.
Oh my goch, that's so cool that you got to meet them. But
oh yeah, and he's a really great guy. We've communicated a couple times over the years, and when I started this podcast, I actually reached out to him and let him know I was doing this. We immediately jumped on a call. And he's like, so tell me what you have in mind for this podcast. You got to stick to this niche. Here's what you got to do, this and this. Because he's had several of his own podcasts. So he was really helpful. And,
oh my gosh, that's so sweet. I love it when people are really like that genuinely kind. Like,
oh yeah,
he's so nice.
He's fucking hilarious too. If you think if you think I'm cringe, look up Chris Damaris. He is fucking hilarious, but he's brilliant. He's weird, but in the best possible way. He's genius. I kid you not. And yeah. little tangent there, but really one of the sweetest guys ever. And but yeah, no, I did Adobe Illustrator back in the day, and even though I don't have Adobe Illustrator now because Adobe is fucking expensive.
It is.
Last time I had it, it was $40 a month. Not doing it anymore. Thank you very much. But but I still learned a lot of like animation skills, and I use that for embroidery now. And I also use it. Yeah, and thank God for CapCut. Because now I can use it for like doing the animations for the videos on here for like introductions and whatnot. Yeah. So a little goes a long way.
It really does.
Yeah.
It really does. I use mostly Canva. Like they got some things.
Yeah. I've been meaning to use Canva to maybe one day make some t-shirts for this podcast.
So, oh, that would be cool.
Yeah. Hopefully.
Cool.
Hopefully. One day. And then so what else were you planning on writing? Like, what other stories do you have in mind that, or if you don't want to talk about that in case someone might, steal your ideas?
No, I can talk about it because I think the thing is that a lot of similar ideas happen, but each person is different and the perspective they bring to that story is going to be different no matter what. And then the way that they write is going to be different. So even though I wouldn't love if someone wrote When Oceans Rise all over again, I still think that if they really meant to write like a Little Mermaid retelling from like the DB perspective, that it would still be a different story than what I did. You know what I mean? So, when I wrote this book, I kept getting comments that the monsters were so scary that it was a lot like Asian horror, which I love Asian horror and I am Asian. So that makes a lot of sense. And I was like, oh, maybe that is what I'm doing. And I started looking into it, and it's very Lovecraftian is what I lean toward, that whole like, fantasy horror
tentacles
stuff, even though it's a little cosmic. And I was like, oh, this makes sense. Maybe what I'm interested in is horror, or maybe I want to do both, right? Like, and so I have this that is fantasy but has those little horror elements, and I was like, you know what, I want to do something more horror with a little bit of fantasy elements. So I spent a summer, not this summer, last summer, and I wrote a YA horror about a girl whose sister dies and then comes back to haunt her. And she believes that this person that her sister died in this hotel that she burnt down when she was younger. Not burnt down, but she set it on fire, and her childhood friend's mom died in that fire. And so their family's really pretty hated in this town. And so when her sister dies, nobody really believes that her sister is dead because they don't find the body. And so she's got to get into this hotel to prove that her sister did die there, because she is very much like one of the entities that haunts this place. Like any of the entities that haunt this place, there's a very specific way that these entities are. And so she strongly believes it. And so she joins this team of like psychic investigators under kind of false pretenses so that she can get herself in there to investigate. And it was really fun because I really brought in a lot of that, psychic magic, which is much more grounded. But because there are these supernatural elements, it stays a little bit more fantasy than straight horror. And that's the one that my agent and I are like working on a proposal for right now. I have the whole book. I like rewrote that book this summer. So I hated doing it because it was like I was doing it again, but structurally it needed some work. So I just, instead of looking at the old draft, just redid the whole thing. And it was like pulling teeth. Like, I got to tell you, it's not because it isn't good. It's because I have ADD and I don't want to do the same thing again. Revisions are different than a massive rewrite like that, So it was very like hard for my ADD to do that again, but I did. And so I actually was working on edits right before this podcast. So hopefully that sells. I hope. So I have that. I wrote an adult, like a new adult horror for that anthology. So I'm kind of staying in the fantasy and horror space. But I tapped into new adult for the first time. And that was really actually very fun because I got to do a spicy scene, which I don't do when I'm writing YA. And that was really, actually, I loved that. I didn't realize that I would love that until I did it. And I was like, oh, this is so great. I would probably do that again. So that's something to explore in the future as well. And then my Banshee book is definitely paranormal romance. Stays in fantasy, but it's definitely hooked into paranormal romance.
That's a great segue to, I can talk. That's actually a really great segue into my next question about like, how do you incorporate romance into your stories? Because this is this whole podcast is about like reading smut and spicy books and romances and whatnot. So so how do you incorporate romance into your stories?
You know what? I used to think that I would be solidly like romance first and then I'm adding in the fantasy elements. But anytime I've ever stepped back from a book, people are always like, you need more romance. And so maybe that's not like my strongest suit. And I have to, I think it comes from this fear that I wouldn't be taken seriously when I was younger, or that it wouldn't be like, readable or wanted enough. And that's not true at all. People love romance in books, but there was that idea that was a lie in my head that I believed for so long that I think I was like broken in that way. Like, I don't feel like the most confident. Like, even with this book, it's got a subplot with a healthy romance in it, but it's not central. You know what I mean? And
the subplots.
Yes. And so then the Banshee book is so central that sometimes, like even recently, it got called Insta-love. And I love Insta-love. I think there's a place for it and like a vibe for it. Like, if I want to read that, like that's what I want, right? But I also was a little surprised it was called that, because there had been so many edits and revisions where I worked to not have it be called that. Well, why not? Because like YA, that is a place for insta-love. People fall in love very fast when they're that age, and it's not wrong, and it's not inaccurate for the age, and it doesn't have to be unhealthy. You know what I mean? Like, and I think that we look at these books, and if we know that we're going into it as insta-love, like, I don't think that that's inappropriate depending on how it's done. So, I don't know. But I was surprised it was called that, because there had been so many revisions to, like, back when it was written a long time ago, pull back on that. And for it to be, like, called that now was just so strange to me. But I don't think that the negative connotation of that exists as much as it did, like, 10 years ago in YA. 10 years ago in YA, it was so, like, hated, I guess, like so taboo. And I was like, well, though, like, isn't it part of paranormal romance? Like, isn't it kind of like, if you're looking at things like Twilight, if you're looking at things like Shiver, if you're looking at really the books from the golden age where paranormal romance really hit, that was kind of a staple, you know, and it still happens today in some of the paranormal romances I see that are kind of classified as romantasy. And I don't think it's wrong, but, you know, yeah.
To each their own.
To each their own.
All right, I'm going to wrap it up here for today. Robin, thank you so much for joining me. I absolutely love this conversation. And where can we find you on social media?
Oh, I'm on TikTok at Robbie Hood with 2 I's. That is my favorite platform. You can find me on Instagram too. Author Robin Alvarez is not my favorite platform. I like it, but it's not my favorite. Yeah.
Okay.
And also, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for coming on. I really do appreciate you. Fellow readers, thank you for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed this chapter almost as much as the book you are currently reading. Stay safe, everyone. Have a wonderful day.